So this AI roundtable this time around, there's been constant, asks and people talking about like, hey, like, how do you do evaluation of like the LLM output? It's been like a topic that comes up. It's actually the topic that Kat and I was really interested in hearing how other people do it because this is where we were struggling. But yeah, we'll just kind of like dive into it. And then like now that we'll have a recording and talking about different things that we've learned, we will, be able to like share this more broadly in different channels. So yeah, let's start with evaluating, building AI products. So tip just what we're gonna basically cover, you know, with AI products, it's like a wild new world. And like the product development process, like you have to adapt your process to, building AI products. Another thing that I've learned in the past 2 weeks after speaking with a few folks is actually depending on what you're trying to build, what kind of product you build or what feature you're trying to build, there's a different process and a different like evaluation like process you should have. And then I'm gonna go deep dive on like I'm actually gonna show you the spreadsheet. I scrubbed the data of like our data, but like here's like how we did it, and like here's a spreadsheet of like how we did it. And then I'm gonna talk about like, oh, like we did some research and talked to a bunch of folks and evaluated different products around like, hey, like how do you even make this even better and make this like even faster, right? So very briefly, a little bit about me. I'm senior product manager at Housecall Pro. I'm on the innovation team. Catherine, that's on the call, is on the innovation team as well. And we just move quickly. We try to take big swings, and we try to de-risk big bets by moving quickly and taking those swings as often as possible. So that's basically what we do. And then a little bit of background. I went to community college. I first studied graphic design. I went to University of Maryland and then got my bachelor's and master's in information systems. And generally, I feel like I just like tinkering with new and interesting things like throughout like the 10 years, basically. I think guess now 11 years since I started college. And so an example of like, here's something that I did at a hackathon. It was just like at a hackathon, it was four of us. We essentially used an alpaca fluff, like a stuffed animal. We had a friend that was good with like electrical engineering, and then we hooked that up into like a Google Home, like a Google Home Mini to like actually talk to it, and then it would talk back to us. And it was basically like, oh, like can we create like a virtual piggy bank for kids so that they can like learn to save money? That was basically the premise. That was a fun project. And then another project that I've done like back in like 2020 was like, hey, like how do we have like impromptu conversations now that we're working remote? This was like 2020, like beginning of the pandemic. So I thought of like, hey, like, is there a Discord type-esque interface with being able to like drag and drop so you can have multiple conversations in like in a single like Discord channel, basically, or in a single Zoom room? What we learned is people don't want to be on a call for the entire day. And so it's like, that doesn't work. But it was interesting nevertheless. So as you can see, lots of tinkering, lots of fun. Okay, so back to AI. So we're in a wild new world with AI, and there's a lot of like skills and knowledge that you need to like learn that's new to build AI products. And there's a term that I started using where it's basically, hey, like product development as we've understood it pre-generative AI is deterministic. It's deterministic product development. The engineers write code, you run unit integration end-to-end test, and then every time that code runs, it does the same thing every single time. But now in the world of AI, it's probabilistic, where the engineers write code, prompts can be written by everyone because not only the engineers can write the prompts, you run your test and you also do the evaluations, which we're going to talk about more. And even though the code is consistent, every time you hit enter and even it's the same information you send, the output may not be the same. It's probabilistic. And so every time you hit enter on whatever you think that you send to the LLM, it may not have the same output. And so what you want to do with like the evals is how do you reduce the kind of variations every time you hit enter and also the variations as you change the code as well. Because anytime you change a little bit of the code or the prompt, it can change the output dramatically. Some quick things, like two major impacts in product development that we learned is like design prototypes doesn't really get you meaningful feedback. Like the output is the feedback that you need, and it's the product you need, or the feedback that you need. And so like just showing design prototypes don't isn't we found isn't super meaningful. And so you got to focus on like what is the LLM output, because like that's actually the product experience. And the other piece is like you need to create a benchmark data set to assess the product iterations. And so it's just like you need to decide like what are the questions you're going to use to grade the output every time you make a change. And that question set can change, but is often like static. It's like this is my benchmark. And every time I make an iteration or a change, you're gonna have to say, okay, like how did the LLM perform on these questions that you've already created? This benchmark data set, basically. So I'm going to talk a little bit about different use case, different processes. I would say that I'm not an expert on the different use cases and how to run the evals, but after like talking to a few folks and just like exploring, I've noticed that how they do like evaluations are different from how we did evaluations, and it depends on the use case you create. So one is like summarization. So you say, hey, here's a bunch of text and summarize it for me, right? You say, hey, here's a document that I'm looking at, summarize it for me. Here's a call recording. I transcribed it, summarize it for me. Like here's an Excel file. It's like summarize some highlight information about it. Those are all like summarization use cases. And then the next one is like generation, like generate on a prompt. He's like, you give it a prompt, you give it some information, and you want it to generate something new and novel. So it's like, hey, here's my email, give me a response, and here's what I kind of want to say. If you know about like Jasper, it's like, oh, like here's my branding, like, and I want to introduce a new feature, like generate a bunch of like text that I want to put for my landing page. That's what I would call like generation or generate on a prompt with like contextual information. The next one is RAG, which is retrieval augmented generation. And I describe this as both summarization and generation at the same time, where you're saying, hey, I'm not looking at one document, I'm looking at a bunch of documents, and I'm going to vector embed them. I'm not going to get into it, but you're going to vector embed them. And then what you're going to say is, hey, I'm going to put a question in, and you look at all the documents, figure out which pieces are relevant, and then you give me a response, like a summarized response of the like relevant information. So I consider that like summarization plus generation, and it's called retrieval augmented generation. A different one is like chat experiences. It's like a back and forth conversation between AI and the user. And the most interesting one that I've seen out in the wild is like character.ai, I believe, where there's not a predefined like I'm trying to like get a certain outcome. It's like, hey, I defined an idea or a character or persona of the AI, and I want you to continuously converse with them. And so like if there's not a clear set of like what like it should answer in this way, it's like as long as they're staying in character or within guidelines, like go wild, right? Meta also released a bunch of like personas where they took a bunch of celebrities and like AI-fied them basically and said, and, hey, like users, you can go talk to these AI characters basically. But a really good example is like character AI. And the last one is classification. It's like label or categorize the information. It's like, okay, like you actually want the LLM to like classify this information and make sure they're like labeling it correctly. And it could also be like using the right tool, using the right API or GPT action. I can cover on that later. We can talk about that a little bit later. But it's also like, hey, like, are they generating the quote unquote right SQL query as well? So I consider that like classification. All right. So I'm gonna deep dive on like what we did and like our use case, our very first use case that we built out. And we called it like a help article bot. And basically it answers questions to the user about how to use our product, and it is like a complement to our current customer service solutions. You know, as our customer base has grown, we've, continuously seen an increase of our like inbound request for like how do I use this product, and just like customer tickets and customer chats and emails of like I need help with the product, or like I don't understand this product, or like there's a bug, right? And so it's like a complement to that to like reduce the volume that we've been getting there. And so here's just a closer look of that same thing. And just so you can kind of see like what it looks like. So this is a RAG use case. And often people ask like, oh, like why did you build it yourself? Why don't you already use Intercom? Why don't you just pay Intercom because they have a solution for this? It's like, well, one, like we wanted to build a muscle in building AI products. Um, there's a lot of things that we learned by doing this instead of like paying Finn to do it and paying Intercom to do it. Um, and this will allow us to like create the organization and processes and learnings and skill sets that we need for future AI products that are currently in flight. Like we're working on a lot of things that are like beyond this as well. And then the other thing was like, oh, actually, as we were working on this, we also realized that like Intercom would never know enough data about a customer to be like super, super useful. So like an example is like Intercom could never like accurately be like, oh, I know what your billing plan is, and so therefore we can be like, hey, like you actually don't have access to this thing, and like you should actually go purchase it, right? And so now there's like potential like upsell opportunities with this, where we say, hey, like you don't have access to this thing that you're looking for. Um, like you should explore this landing page and learn about the product. And we can also push information out to them or say, hey, like um we found that like companies in your industry and in your size gets a lot of value from this add-on that you currently don't have, right? And like Finn and Intercom wouldn't be able to do that, but we could do that because we built it all in-house. All right, so I'm going to do a live show and tell. I basically scrubbed our spreadsheet that we actually used, and uh, I could show you like basically what our process was. And so this is basically like what we looked at every week. We basically had a set of questions. It's, I think, like 55 questions. And the way we grab this information is we already use Intercom. And so we said, okay, like let's look at our Intercom chats and figure out what are the top questions that people are asking. And let's make that our benchmark, right? And we said, okay, from from that question set, right? And all these help articles that we've written already, like what was the answer? Like once we passed it to the LLM. And we would grade it and say, hey, like, was it correct? Was it correct but unhelpful? Mostly correct, incorrect? And you could see we had 4 different people doing it. And then you can see that, sometimes there's like not a consensus of that. Like sometimes like it's a little bit of like you gotta agree as a team of like what the right way to grade it is. And we basically did that week over week where it was always the same questions. We would make a change to either the underlying content, like the help articles, or we would make a change to the prompt or like how it was like stringed together with the code. And then we would see what the output was. And then we would do the grading again every single time. And we did that for multiple weeks. Um, And so here it's a little bit more of like, oh, like was it an improvement or not? Like, do we think it's like the like we need to make changes to like the prompt or the just like how we string things together? Or I think there's another one. It's like reference materials. Yeah. It's like, oh, like the help articles, like we need to go update. Like the bot doesn't know that the help articles are wrong. It just assumes the help articles are right. So we like, oh, like we knew that we got to go update the help articles. And then we also knew that's like, oh, like here are the articles that reference. And then this is like, here's a bunch of text from the help articles that it used. So we did that for many weeks. And then there were also like things where we say, hey, like we're seeing that it's consistently good. Like, it's consistently good. So we actually set it up and we're like, hey, for these, it's just like let's what we called golden answers, like the old golden like data set, where we'll talk about it more later. It's like we see that these are consistently good and we like how it answers it consistently. And we'll talk about more about like why that's useful. And so we kind of like summarize this up. You can see like there's like a bunch of percentages from the calculations from the different sheets. And then we had this one sheet where it's like, all right, what has been the progress of this? Like, how have we been seeing the progress of this over time? And this is all just like summations of like the different sheets, right? And then we had like hey, like what's our target of like what's good enough for us to release, right? And then like where do we really want it? Like what's our product ideal? And you can see that we have it separated up of like correctness, which is really just accuracy, like how often is it correct? And then we also added harmlessness because we actually said that it's harmless if it gives the default answer. It's okay if it gives the default answer. And the default answer would be like, hey, I don't, based on the context that I have, I can't answer this question. Like, I actually don't know. We said, hey, that's fine. Like, if it says that, harmless, that's all right. So we have these different like factors which say correctness and harmlessness. Um, and so for the golden answers, I can't show it here, but what we started doing is like, can we start actually doing some of this automatically, like without human evaluation? And so I'm gonna go continue here. Oh, not try Canva Pro. Where is it? What we were doing was basically like multiple weeks of manual human evals, right? It's very time consuming. It's like it takes, you know, 4, 6 hours for four folks to grade it on their own, come together, have a consensus, and be like, this is what we like say is the grade, and then talking with our engineers and data scientists of like, hey, like based on what we learned, like this is or based on like how we graded it, like this is what we think, like we got to go update the help articles, we got to go update, we think we should change the prompt in some way, right? But you can actually, now that you have a golden data set, you can actually use off-the-shelf ML models to do different gradings of different properties. So there's off-the-shelf models of like, how similar is this to the reference material? How similar is this from a previous answer? What is the sentiment? Like, is there toxicity in their response? How fluent is it in that language that I try to respond to? Like how formal it is. And these are all like off-the-shelf models that you can use to like give these gradings. Another one that I'll throw out there that I've heard as well that is useful is called BERT score and Rouge, Rouge. I won't get into what those are, but go Google them and search them up and learn about them. Oh, forward. Um, Another way that people have started doing it is actually have an LLM do the evaluations. Because now that you have multiple weeks of data of like how a human would grade it, have like give the LLM enough information where they understand how you grade it so that it would try to grade it. And what you would have to do then is like, okay, now grade the LLM grader to make sure it's consistent with like what you're trying to output. And people have been exploring this a lot and have been refining this a lot, and a lot of them have been getting really good results. So this is like the next step of the evolution of like how to grade your outputs, right? But you have to do this. You need this to do this. You have to do the manual human evals. And then it's like fully automated LLM evals. Nobody has to touch anything and it just runs on its own. As far as I can tell, we're not there yet. And you always need some sort of human in the loop, like evaluating it. All right. So last thing here, we've been like doing a lot of research around like, hey, evaluation platforms that are out there because like we've been working on it on mainly through spreadsheets. Um, and the ones that we found the most interesting is deep checks and Vellum. Um, deep checks, what I've seen is like their ML and LLM evals are the best as far as I've seen, and they do a really good job here. Um, Langsmith, if you're familiar with LangChain, they created a new product called Langsmith. Tracing of each step I haven't talked about, but it's basically like, hey, if you have multiple steps to get your output, being able to see like what's happening at every single step. Langsmith has a solution for that, but from what I've seen, Vellum allows you to even view it like visually even better. Um, like you can see like the different steps and like modify like the workflows. It's really interesting. I highly recommend you check it out. But this is just based on like, hey, my own research and analysis. I highly recommend you check all of these folks out. Um, I think, if you wanted to do kind of like a first step after the spreadsheet, go maybe like deep checks because of the ML and LLM evals is like a nice natural like good step next. And then Vellum, I think, has some really interesting functionality here that I didn't talk about, not just like the evals. And that's it. And that was just open Q&A.
Nice, Sunny.
Yeah, that's awesome. I think yeah, somebody brought up the topic of evals in the last meeting, and I think what you've shown here is like a very clear kind of framework that you developed in being in the trenches, right? Like and so yeah, this was a really insightful view. And the other takeaway I had was around just how expensive it is to run manual evals. So you said 4 to 6 hours by a team of four,
Yeah.
which is crazy. Like that is a long time.
Yeah.
Um, yeah,
Yvonne isn't here, but Yvonne, when I talked to her, she said, yeah, we hired a team of Philippine like contractors to help us do that. And so I don't have any information of like how she did it and like what her learnings from it are and how to do it. I recommend you reach out to her and I'll send you like a message of like who that is and like she's in the Slack, the community Slack.
got it. So it was her that so you have somebody helping you lead the evaluation, Sonny, is what you're saying, right? You're not just doing
Yeah.
that yourself with a team of 4 or 6.
Yeah. That's
That's
cat.
me.
That's cat. Cat's
Yeah.
Oh,
help.
nice.
Our
Awesome.
team philosophy is very much like if you don't know what to do, just start and see what unfolds. And we're very much the like do what doesn't scale to prove out a concept and then figure out how to scale it.
Yep.
That's currently where I'm at is like, how the F are we going to scale this thing? Because it's clear from what we've seen, there's always going to be like automated machine QA in tandem with human beings. And there's companies that, I mean, even I don't know who it is, if it's Chat GPT or something, but they have like thousands and thousands of people just evaluating the output to make sure that it's working. And you mentioned Yvonne hired a team in the Philippines, and ultimately what we want to do is sort of transform our own customer success department into those evaluators as opposed to like front lines answering each individual question. But that's hard. So curious to hear anyone else's thoughts. Tricky
Interesting.
problems. Yeah. I'm curious maybe if like are you all where are you all at in your AI journeys? Like are you just curious or do you have, companies that are hiring you to build strategies? Like what's your experience been like and have you thought about this evaluation question at all?
I'll go. I'm George. I'm in Las Vegas, and I run operations for a software development agency. And so the problem that I'm trying, it's not a problem, but the efficiencies that I'm trying to find are how can we use LLMs to really make our code building process efficient. So we're fighting with this evaluation problem because
Yeah.
largely we're using cursor.ai and tinkering around with, getting our code bases into other LLMs and then asking it to generate, usable or partially usable code, and we haven't figured out a framework for how do we evaluate what the what's generated based on the prompting, as well as the code base and any other references that we provide. So we're still trying to figure out like how do we provide the right context to the LLM, and also a lot of our developers are not native English speakers, so we're also trying to figure out how do we help them do prompting in like a organized way. So we're very early stage. We know that we need to evaluate the output and understand what sort of prompts will lead to successful code generation. We're very focused on little chunks. We're not trying to say, I want to build an app to help technicians plan their visits on site. This
Yeah.
is the rough data model. This is like how clients interact and pay. Please write me a code base. Like, we're more like, all right, we would like to generate some unit tests for the purposes of making sure we don't break anything on our releases, or we'd like you to maybe write a callback function using these different parts of the code base as reference. And so that becomes a little bit difficult when you're inside of a tool like Cursor, and we don't really have, we're not piping it through an API. We don't have access to all of the
Yeah.
prompts that are being used. So I'm not quite sure how we could get to the point where we're doing the same types of evaluations that you all are, but I think it would be very beneficial for us as we make progress. So that was helpful and interesting, and I learned a few new tools that I'll check out.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because it's like slightly different, right? Where it's like you're not building the AI tool, you're using a tool that is powered by AI, and you're evaluating like what comes out of that. And so you don't have the full control around, how are they linked together? Like uh what's the prompt, like the system prompt that goes in that like the people who create the AI product have. Um yeah, that's a interesting, different, slightly different problem that I don't have answers for you for, unfortunately.
One thing we're also doing, and this might, forgive me if I'm naive and too early in the process, I don't know, but my boss and I are trying to enable our company to use Chat GPT safely just across the board in their everyday job functions. This would not be like our productizing the use of an LLM, but just, oh, you want to run a report? Like ask GPT to do it for you. Um, and I guess the main takeaway that we keep educating people on is like, if you write a prompt, it's not going to be right the first time, and you'll keep working through it. And there's always, always, always going to be some element of a human being looking over it to evaluate whether it's satisfies your needs. Um, I don't know what platform you're using, but we're, setting folks up on an enterprise license with Chat GPT so that we can write custom GPTs and basically give a framework of, hey, here's like 85% with this prompt, like write this type of code and don't do this. And, you go to set of rules. And then on the enterprise level, it's expensive, but it also ensures that the data that you're uploading isn't being trained on by other folks. I mean, I know that we've had legal look into like, if we use ChatGPT, write our code, do we still own it type of a deal? You guys have, I'm sure, concerns I can't even begin to comprehend around that. So anyway, for what it's worth, it can be, the main takeaway is really just like human beings will always, always have to review and make sure that the output you're getting is up to snuff, and you just want to be careful about how you do it.
Yeah, that was actually the first hurdle that we had to overcome, where the developers would say, this is not usable code. And we're just trying to like explain to them, hey, if you can generate 75% of what you need, and then you're an editor, but you can do
Exactly.
that in, hours instead of days, then that's what we're pursuing. We're not trying to ask a code base to magically appear based on some instructions that you provide. So we've been experimenting with it for a couple months. We finally have gotten over that hump, and we've had some light bulb moments, and now we're starting
Yeah.
to train the team. So I think we'll start to see a lot of dividends over the next few months. And I think once the engineers are comfortable with some new processes, then they'll be like, we've already seen a couple of them have started sharing prompts that work really well for themselves. So we're already trying to figure out like, okay, what is the right way for us to document prompting so that even if it's a different product that we're building and a different API that we need to create, how can we use some good practices around prompting to make sure that that starting point is actually moving them really far forward and not causing them to have to do a lot of debugging. So I think, again, we're
We're doing
early.
that too.
Yeah, we're early, but we're really optimistic at this point.
We're for I'd be curious to hear how you got adoption, because I've noticed that's kind of what the hardest trend we're facing too, is like just changing people's mindset is not any, like I've been doing my job for decades now and you're going to tell me to do it differently. Like it's hard, right? So what we've
Yeah,
been doing is we'll literally have like brown bag lunch. We'll be like, hey, bring your lunch. We're going to do kind of a show and tell. We'll come up with a real use case of a real problem that this team is trying to solve. And we'll work through it and show like, we're going to get it wrong. We're going to get it wrong. We're going to get it wrong. Eventually we might get it, like you said, 75%. And then we're documenting that and sharing it in Slack channels and Confluence pages, et cetera, to just make sure that these learnings are public enough to our own team members, to kind of keep them motivated, I guess. But yeah,
yeah,
cool. Interesting.
yeah. Our CTO, we had one project where somebody had to miss some time, and so we were behind. The front end was weeks ahead of the back end, and our CTO jumped in and caught the back end up in a matter of days. And when the rest of the team saw that, it was just like, oh, holy crap, he just did weeks of work in a matter of days. So that was like the first thing that got people excited. And now we've figured out we can't generate front end from design yet. I think that's a long ways off to truly do that in a way that like a strong React team can use the code output. But we have also in the last few days identified a lot of things that the front end team can generate once there are parts of the code base up and working. So it's promising and we're early, but we want to keep plugging away at it. And I'm just trying to soak in everything everybody else is doing so I can get some ideas for how to proceed.
Totally.